Hello and welcome back as we continue reading The Bible Jesus Read by Philip Yancey. And hopefully you've been enjoying it. We're going to finish up the chapter today on Psalms, spirituality in every key. And this portion is called Postscript, and it just says Problem Psalms. And we're going to read this and be done for the day. And hopefully you've been really enjoying this book. We're about halfway through it, maybe a little bit further. And then we'll look at what our next book is going to be. And so if you have any suggestions, just make sure you leave them along the way in the comment section, and that way I'll know any books that you're interested in hearing me read next time. So, Postscript, Problem Psalms. You don't have to read far in Psalms before encountering some troubling passages. Furious outbursts hidden like landmines in the midst of soothing pastoral poetry. Some seem on the level of, "I hope you get hit by a truck," schoolyard epitaphs. Imprecatory psalms, these are called, or sometimes vindictive psalms, or more bluntly cursing psalms, because of the curses they rain down on their opponents. The cursing psalms present a major obstacle to most readers. How in the world can we read, let alone pray, these angry and often violent poems from an ancient warrior culture? Asked Kathleen Norris. At a glance, they seem overwhelmingly patriarchal, ill-tempered, moralistic, vengeful, and often seem to reflect precisely what is wrong with our world. Why are such outbursts lurking in the midst of sacred scriptures? Readers have proposed various explanations. Number one, the cursing psalms express an appropriate righteous anger over evil. The late Professor Alan Bloom, author of The Closing of the American Mind, told about asking his undergraduate class at the University of Chicago to identify an evil person. Not one student could do so. Evil simply does not exist as a category in their minds. The inability to recognize and identify evil, said Bloom, is a perilous sign in our society. I have received great help on this issue from my wife Janet, who for several years worked near an inner-city housing project. She saw pervasive evil every day. The gangs who sniped at sidewalk pedestrians with automatic rifles, the policemen who roughed up innocent people because of skin color, the thieves who knocked down senior citizens outside the currency exchange where they cashed their Social Security checks. One evening, Janet came home boiling with anger. A janitor who was tyrannizing the residents of one senior citizen's building. He would use his master key to enter widows' apartments, then beat them up and steal their money. Everyone knew the culprit, but because he wore a mask and could not be positively identified, the city housing authority was stalling on his transfer or dismissal. If Alan Bloom had asked his wife to describe an evil person that day, he would have gotten a graphic description. It was precisely that kind of structural evil, corrupt judges, slave owners, robbers, oppressors of the poor, racists, terrorists, that the psalmists were responding to. Psalm 109 calls down curses on a man who hounded to death the poor and the needy and the brokenhearted. He loved to pronounce a curse. May it come on him. In reading the cursing psalms, think of the testimony from victims' families that sometimes get airplayed on television news. The father of a daughter killed by a drunk driver stands before the court and, physically shaking, tells all of the wound that will never be healed. Or think of the Goldman family statements against O.J. Simpson during the civil trial against him. In his reflections on Psalms, Dietrich Bonhoeffer had no trouble understanding the sentiments behind the cursing psalms. They precisely express the anguish of the entire Christian community living under Nazi rule. The righteous anger explanation may illuminate the motives behind the cursing psalms, but it does not remove all the problems they present. Although furious, Janet did not stalk around the house muttering threats like, "May his children be wandering beggars, may they be driven from their ruined homes," which is from Psalm 109:10, or "Happy is he who seizes their infants and dashes them against the rocks," which is from Psalm 137:9. Number two, The cursing Psalms express a spiritual immaturity corrected by the New Testament. C.S. Lewis, genuinely chagrined by the cursing Psalms, discussed this approach in the book Reflections on the Psalms. He contrasted the psalmist's spirit of vengefulness with another spirit, love your enemies. Forgive them, for they know not what they do, exemplified in the New Testament. And the reaction of the psalmist to injure, though profoundly natural, is profoundly wrong. Well, Lewis concluded he used words like diabolical, contemptible, ferocious, barbaric, and self-pitying to describe those sentiments. Observing nothing comparable to the psalmist's vindictive spirit in pagan literature, Lewis developed a rather complicated argument related to the election of the Jews. Of all bad men, religious bad men are the worst, he said. The Jews' higher calling had led to a snobbery and self-righteousness that came out in such inappropriate ways as the cursing psalms. These arguments did not endure Lewis to the Jewish community. Not long ago, the Christian Century published an article by a rabbi taking umbrage at Lewis's remarks. Certainly Jesus introduced a new spirit. You have heard it said, but I say unto you. But as Lewis himself notes, the Bible does not present such a clear-cut progression from the Old Testament to the New. Commands to love your enemies appear in the Old Testament as well. To complicate matters even further, New Testament authors quote approvingly some of the most problematic of the cursing Psalms. For example, Peter applied one of the curses of Psalm 69 directly to Judas in Acts 1:20. Paul applied another, may their eyes be darkened so they cannot see and their backs bent forever, to unbelieving Israel. Cursing Psalms are not so easily dismissed. In fact, the British scholar Derek Sheriffs points out that C.S. Lewis himself changed as he underwent a personal trial late in life. Read The Problem of Pain and Grief Observed back to back, and the change is obvious. The first book deals with suffering in the abstract and gives much philosophical insight into the role of pain plays in life. And the second book, written after his wife died in excruciating death of bone cancer, reads in part like an extended imprecatory psalm. Lewis toyed with the notion of God as a cosmic sadist, a torturer who slams a door in the faces of those who need him most. Lewis reflects in his journal, all that suffered about the cosmic sadist was not so much the expression of thought as of hatred. I was getting from it the only pleasure a man in anguish can get, the pleasure of hitting back. It was really just Billingsgate, mere abuse, telling God what I thought of him. I wonder what Lewis would have written about the cursing Psalms after going through that personal ordeal. Number 3. The cursing Psalms are best understood as prayers. The cursing Psalms appear in a considerably different light when we remember their literary context. We readers are overhearing prayers addressed to God. Seen in this way, the cursing Psalms demonstrate what I have called spiritual therapy, taken to its limits. As Dorothy Sayers once remarked, we all have diabolical thoughts, but there's a world of difference in responding with words instead of deeds, whether, say, we write a murder mystery or commit murder. If a person wrongs me unjustly, I have several options. I can seek personal revenge, a response condemned by the Bible. I can deny or suppress my feelings of hurt and anger. Or I can take those feelings to God and trust in God with the task of retributive justice. The cursing Psalms are vivid examples of that last option. It is mine to avenge, I will repay, says the Lord. Prayers like the cursing Psalms place vengeance in the proper hands. Significantly, the cursing Psalms express their outrage to God, not to the enemy. Catherine Norris, who struggled with cursing Psalms in her book, The Cloister Walk, came to an accommodation with them in her later Amazing Grace. There she tells of inviting students in parochial schools to compose their own cursing psalms. Those who were picked on by their big brothers and sisters have a natural talent for imprecation, she found. One little boy wrote a poem called The Monster Who Was Sorry. He began by admitting that he hates it when his father yells at him. His response in the poem is to throw his sister down the stairs, and then to wreck his room, and finally to wreck the whole town. The poem concludes, "Then I sit in my messy house and say to myself, I shouldn't have done all that." If that boy had been a religious novice in the 4th century monastic desert, added Norris, his elders might have judged him well on the way toward repentance. Already he had become aware of the renovations necessary in the messy house before it became a place where God might dwell. Instinctively, we want to clean up our feelings in our prayers, but perhaps we have it all backwards. Perhaps we should strive to take all our worst feelings to God. After all, what would be gossip when addressed to anyone else is petition when addressed to God. What is vengeful curse when spoken about someone is a plea of helpless dependence when spoken to God. I've made it a weekly practice on a long walk on the hill behind my home to present to God my anger against people who have wronged me. I recount all my reasons for feeling unfairly treated or misunderstood, forcing myself to open up deep feelings to God. Does God not know them anyway? I can testify that the outpouring itself has a therapeutic effect. Usually I come away feeling as if I had just released a huge burden. The unfairness no longer sticks like a thorn inside of me as it once did. I've expressed it out loud to someone, to God. Sometimes I find that in the process of expression I grow in compassion. And God's Spirit speaks to me of my own selfishness and my judgmental spirit, my own flaws that others have treated with grace and forgiveness, my pitifully limited viewpoint. Miroslav Volf, a native Croatian who taught theology there during the war in the former Yugoslavia and who learned to identify with the cursing psalms very personally, explains in Exclusion and Embrace how those psalms may in fact lead toward forgiveness. For the followers of the crucified Messiah, the main message of the imprecatory psalms is this: rage belongs before God. And there is no mere cathartic discharge of pent-up aggression before the Almighty, who ought to care. Much more significantly, by placing unattended rage before God, we place both our unjust enemy and our own vengeful self face to face with a God who loves and does justice. Hidden in the dark chambers of our hearts and nourished by this system of darkness, hate grows and seeks to infest everything with its hellish will to exclusion. In the light of the justice and love of God, however, hate recedes and the seed is planted for the miracle of forgiveness. Gradually, my weekly practice has expanded from a focus on myself to a sensitivity to others around me. Some weeks I have no surface feelings of vengeance or resentment. Can I, though, use these psalms as insights into others who are suffering? What of countries that just got hit by hurricanes, floods, or droughts? Might Christians there be praying the psalms of desolation? What of my friends battling cancer? A woman living with an abusive husband? An alcoholic who cannot quite triumph? Can the difficult psalms help me enter into their struggles and perhaps pray the prayer on their behalf? One reason I lean toward this way of understanding the cursing psalms is that I have read the end of the story in the book of Revelation. In that book, we see a preview of a time when the most extreme of cursing psalms will come true, even the most notorious. Psalm 137 finds fulfillment with such violence the great city of Babylon will be thrown down, never to be found again, in Revelation 18:21. Justice will reign absolutely someday. And accomplishing that will require a time of cataclysmic violence against evil. I see the cursing psalms as an important model for how to deal with evil and injustice. I should not try to suppress my reaction of horror and outrage toward evil, nor should I try to take justice into my own hands. Rather, I should deliver those feelings stripped bare to God. As the books of Job, Jeremiah, and Habakkuk clearly show, God has a high threshold of tolerance for what is appropriate to say in prayer. God can handle my unsuppressed rage. I may well find that my vindictive feelings need God's correction, but only by taking those feelings to God will I have that opportunity for correction and healing. And that ends the chapter on the book of Psalms. And next time we'll be in chapter 5, Ecclesiastes, the end of wisdom. All right, we'll see you next week.